In today's episode, we are going to talk about the IRS IP PIN. Now, I I recognize that in that title, everything is an acronym. So let me break it down. IRS, you all are probably most familiar with, right? The Internal Revenue Service. And then we have the IP, which is identity protection. And then the PIN, which is your, oh shoot, now I'm going to mess it up. Personal identification number. Now, what this is, it is to protect your social security number or your ITIN from being used by someone else. Okay?
Welcome to the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowen's podcast. Are you behind on taxes? Is the IRS threatening you or your business? Are you overwhelmed and confused about how to resolve your tax issues? Let's join Timalyn as she explains your options and how she may be able to help. Timalyn Bowen's is America's favorite EA.
Hey, family. Welcome to episode 80. Yes, 80 of the Tax Relief with Timalyn Bowen's podcast. It is so surreal to me that we've made it to 80 episodes. Yes, I'm just overwhelmed and in awe that you all have found this podcast helpful. And every other Friday, you all are still tuning in to learn about different methods for tax relief and, as I like to share, preventative care. So, for episode 80, I want to make sure that we cover a topic that is going to be relevant to all taxpayers, not just those in trouble, but those who are compliant, who may just want to ensure that they're keeping their information safe. So, in today's episode, we're going to talk about the IRS IP PIN. Now, I recognize that in that title, everything is an acronym. So let me break it down. IRS, you all are probably most familiar with, right? The Internal Revenue Service. And then we have the IP, which is identity protection. And then the PIN, which is your, oh shoot, now I'm going to mess it up. Personal identification number. Now, what this is, it is to protect your social security number or your ITIN from being used by someone else. Okay? So this 6-digit number will keep them from filing a tax return with your information. Not only is an IP PIN available for adult taxpayers, but parents and legal guardians can actually apply for an IP PIN on behalf of their dependent. Okay. So if you're listening to this and you say, okay, I don't have a social security number, that's okay if you still have an ITIN, which is an individual tax identification number. Okay. Now, when you have the IP PIN, you want to make sure that you keep that secure, right? Or else it defeats the whole purpose of you having it to protect your information. The IRS will send that to you and it will help to identify you whether you are filing your return electronically or paper tax return. And here's the beauty of when you e-file. If you e-file or someone attempts to e-file your return without that IP PIN, then the return will be rejected. So the only person outside of yourself who should have access to the IP PIN is your tax professional. And with that being said, the IRS doesn't even give the information to them. You would have to give them your IP PIN. Okay? So with all of the crazy internet scams that are going on, this is just an extra level of protection that you can apply for to keep your information safe. All right. Now, if you don't have one, you don't have to be the victim of identity theft in the past to apply for one. All right. You can even get one if you're not required to file a return each year, for example, like a dependent. But a reason you may want to consider having one for a dependent is that so nobody else can take your dependent social security number and claim them on their tax return. See, if you're dependent, whether it is a minor child or if it is a disabled child, maybe a disabled relative that you care for, or a parent who is your dependent, nobody else would be able to claim them as a dependent if they don't have access to that PIN. Okay. So when we're looking at who is eligible for the IP PIN, as I mentioned before, the individual has to have a social security number or an ITIN, all right, because that is needed to be able to verify the identity of that person when enrolling into the IP PIN program. And again, parents and legal guardians can do this for dependents. So, the fastest way, and the IRS is trying to push us there with technology, to receive an IP PIN is to request it through your online account. Okay. So if you log on to irs.gov and you do that with your ID.me account, it's going to be the same login credentials. If you're not familiar with that or you don't have an IRS account, I am going to link an article that I wrote down in the comments below that will walk you through the process of setting up an account so you can also access your transcripts. But I would recommend if you are wanting to apply for the PIN that you do it on a computer. You can see everything on the phone, but it's just easier to navigate in this situation on the computer. Okay. So you'll see the IP PIN section on your profile page. And with that, the process is going to be a little bit different if you are doing this for a dependent, okay? Because they're under the age of 18 and they're not going to have that ID.me account, you are going to have to use a different method that's not online. But again, easy breezy, beautiful cover girl if you have an IRS online account. And I'll link that as well, how to get an IP PIN in the show notes. Now, if you're doing this for a child or you don't have an IRS account, you can't enroll online, there are two other methods for you to be able to apply for an IP PIN. One of them is to file form 15227. Okay, so form 15227. Now, this form is the application for an identity protection personal identification number. There is certain criteria to use this method with the form. You, of course, have to have a valid social security number or ITIN. I'm going to keep reiterating that. But you also have to have access to a telephone and an adjusted gross income on your last filed return is below $84,000 if you're an individual, or $168,000 for married couples filing jointly. Now, if you're like, okay, I don't know where my adjusted gross income is for your 2024 return that was filed last year, this is making the assumption that you haven't filed 2025 yet, you're going to look at line 11 to find that adjusted gross income. All right. So below 84,000 for individuals or below $168,000 for married filing joint taxpayers. Okay. So once the IRS receives this application, they'll use the telephone number not to text you, but to call you and validate your identity. Once they're able to verify your identity, you'll receive the IP PIN via the mail and it's estimated within 4 to 6 weeks. But you all know how the U.S. Postal Service is right now. So if it's not exactly 4 weeks, I'd give it a little bit more time. maybe even up to 7 weeks, right? Because it could just be behind, even if it has been sent. All right. So, with that method, I do want to bring up the fact that if you apply for an IP PIN for this tax year, each tax year you'll get a new IP PIN. Okay. So, with that being said, the IP PIN that you use to file your 2025 tax return this year is going to be different than the IP PIN that you get next year when you go to file your 2026 return. Okay. And if you're already opted in to receiving these in your IRS account, then you'll receive them there instead of by mail. All right. Now, if you have an adjusted gross income over one of the amounts that I mentioned, or the application just isn't working for you, you can also apply for an IP PIN by making an appointment, an in-person appointment at a local taxpayer assistance center. Now, these in-person appointments aren't as easy to come by. You may have to wait a little bit longer, but if you're able to do that, you want to make sure that you have one form of federal or state issued identification that includes your picture. All right. So I'm here in Louisville near UPSGE. You wouldn't want to take your work badge. Yes, you probably have a beautiful picture. It has your name on it. That is not going to work because that is not a federal or state issued picture identification. Okay. And then in addition to that, you'll need one other form of identification. All right. Now, if you're in person and you are enrolling for an IP PIN for a dependent, you will need to have a form of federal or state issued picture ID and one additional form of identification for yourself. All right. Just as if you were doing it for yourself. And then you'll also need to be able to verify the dependent's identity with two forms of identification, such as their social security card and their birth certificate. Okay. Now, if you're doing this for a dependent, there is a list that the IRS provides of documentation that will work. So I again am going to put that in the show notes, that link, so you can click on that link and see the full list. Okay. So if you're doing it in person, once the identity has been verified, the IP PIN will come in the mail, usually within 3 weeks. But again, you all know how USPS is working and operating right now. I'd give it a little bit of grace. Okay. So with this, a new IP PIN for each tax season. These typically are going to come in the mail in January. Okay. Now, if you're enrolled because you've been the victim of a tax related identity theft, you will get the CP01A notice with your new IP PIN, same way as all the other folks. Okay. Via the mail. Now, I mentioned earlier, if you are already opted into getting that online, you will get it online instead, and the CP01A notice will not be mailed each year. This IP PIN is going to be needed to file your Form 1040, or if you're a non-resident, the 1040NR, or if you're filing a senior form, the 1040SR. Okay, so all of the 1040 series and the IP PIN must be entered on not only electronic returns, but also if you are filing your return by mail. Do not forget to include that IP PIN in the correct spot. Otherwise, if you're mailing it, those already get processed a little bit slower, and it could be the cause of delay because they'll reach out to let you know, hey, someone attempted to file your return. Was it you? The IP PIN wasn't on here. Okay. Now, we're doing all of this to make sure that our identity is protected. Nobody's using our tax information. Please keep in mind the IRS will never ask for your IP PIN. So if you receive a phone call, an email, or a text asking for this information, please be aware that they are scams. All right? I hope that you found this episode helpful. If you know someone who has been a victim of tax identity theft, please share this episode with them. Share this with your family and friends, because my main mission here, if you're new, is to fill the tax literacy gap one taxpayer at a time. I don't want you to be in tax trouble. I don't want you to be the victim of a tax scam, right? You don't even have to work with me directly. I just want to make sure that you get the help that you need. All right? Thank you so much for listening to episode 80. I'll see you all in the next episode. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to listen today. I'd like to thank Jim Ray Consulting Services for helping me get this message out to you. I hope you found the information helpful. Did you know 1 in 50 people have a tax problem? Please share this episode with your friends and family, because you never know who may need help. Again, thanks for listening. Hey, just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It provides a framework and possible solutions for solving your tax problems, but it is not legally binding. Please consult your tax professional regarding your specific tax situation.